Captain Ilara Rice stared out the viewport of the human ship, the Stellar Guardian. The deep blackness of space stretched out before her, dotted with distant stars. But something caught her eye. A faint signal, barely noticeable, hidden within the endless noise of space. A distress signal. The coordinates led to a part of the galaxy humanity had long forgotten. She wasn't sure why she felt drawn to it, but something about the signal seemed important, like a whisper calling for help. She glanced at her crew, serious, focused. They had all been through difficult missions before, but this one felt different. This wasn't a military operation. This wasn't a fight against pirates or rogue factions. This was a cry from the past, from a race humanity hadn't thought about in years. The Scifi. The Scifi had once been powerful allies in the galactic community, but they had disappeared after a devastating war with a hostile alien species, the Krill. The Scifi were forced into isolation, their once proud empire shattered. Other species turned their backs on them, leaving them to struggle on their own. Over time, their story faded from memory, like an old myth no one believed anymore. Ilara felt the weight of their forgotten history. The Scifi weren't just another alien species. They were a symbol of what could happen when the galaxy turned its back on those in need. Captain, her officer, Lieutenant Marcos, interrupted her thoughts. "We're approaching the coordinates. Should we prepare for landing?" Ilara nodded, her voice firm. "Yes. Get the team ready. We don't know what we'll find down there, but we need to help them." As the Stellar Guardian descended into the atmosphere of the Scifi homeworld, Ilara's heart raced. The planet looked as she expected, dead, abandoned. The once great cities were now crumbling ruins. Vast forests stretched across the landscape, but there was a sense of emptiness, like the planet itself had given up on life. When they landed, Ilara's boots hit the ground with a dull thud. The air was thick, but it didn't have the life she had expected. It was heavy with dust and neglect. She looked around at the ruins, her eyes scanning for any sign of life. It was quiet, too quiet. "We're not alone," Marcos whispered, his hand hovering near his weapon. Ilara nodded, sensing the same thing. They weren't just walking through an empty planet. The Scifi had once been an advanced race. Where were they now? A figure appeared in the distance, emerging from the shadow of a broken building. A tall alien, its skin pale and worn, walked toward them. This was Ambassador Thalos, the leader of the Scifi. He approached cautiously, his eyes filled with both hope and caution. "You came," he said softly, as if not daring to believe it. "We received your signal," Ilara replied, her voice calm but determined. "We're here to help." Thalos looked at her, his expression unreadable. After a long moment he nodded. "I never thought anyone would care again." Ilara and her team followed Ambassador Thalos through the ruins of what was once a bustling city. The buildings, though mostly fallen apart, still hinted at the grandeur the Scifi civilization once had. Tall, elegant spires and intricate architecture lay broken, covered in dust and vines. The planet's once vibrant energy had faded into silence. "Welcome to what remains of our home," Thalos said, his voice heavy with sadness. "Once we had great cities, technology, and alliances with other races. But all of it is gone now." Ilara's heart tightened as she listened to him speak. The Scifi weren't just another lost race. They were survivors, trying to keep their dignity in the face of endless hardship. The story of their fall echoed through the empty streets, each corner and building a painful reminder of what had been lost. As they reached a clearing, a group of Scifi gathered, their faces weary but full of quiet strength. Their clothing was simple, designed for survival rather than ceremony. Some looked at Ilara with curiosity, while others appeared more cautious, unsure of the strangers who had arrived. Thalos turned to face Ilara. "We survived the war with the Krill, but we were left with nothing. Our allies turned their backs on us, leaving us to fend for ourselves. The few of us that remain are struggling to keep the memory of our people alive." Ilara's crew members looked around, clearly uncomfortable. The situation was dire, and the Seri needed more than just aid. They needed a way to rebuild. But the galaxy had long since forgotten them. "How many of you are left?" Ilara asked, her voice soft but firm. Fellows hesitated before answering, his eyes filled with pain. "A few thousand, scattered across the planet. We no longer have the strength to fight for what we once had. Many have given up hope. Some have even disappeared into the wilds, never to return." Ilara's mind raced. The Krill weren't the only threat the Suri faced. The environment itself was a harsh enemy. With no resources to repair their world or build new alliances, it was only a matter of time before the Suri would cease to exist altogether. "Is there any way we can help you rebuild?" Ilara asked, determined to make a difference. She wasn't going to let this race vanish into history without a fight. Thelos gave her a small, sad smile. "You are kind, human, but the galaxy has forgotten us. Even the greatest of civilizations can crumble. What you offer, while noble, may not be enough." "We can't let that happen," Ilara replied. "I won't turn my back on you like everyone else." As Ilara spoke, the wind picked up, carrying with it a chill that sent a shiver through her. The silence of the planet felt even heavier now. The Seri needed help, and there was no one else coming. Ilara knew that, no matter how difficult the journey ahead might be, she couldn't let the Suri be forgotten forever. Fellows looked at her, his gaze full of gratitude and uncertainty. "Then let us fight together, human." Back on the Stellar Guardian, Ilara sat in her private quarters, staring at the holo map of the galaxy spread out before her. The Suri homeworld, once thriving and full of life, now seemed like a fading star in the universe, distant and forgotten. The more she thought about it, the more determined she became. She couldn't just walk away from the Suri. They had survived against all odds, and now they needed a chance to rebuild. Ilara's communication console buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was the Galactic Council, the governing body of all the advanced species in the galaxy. She had requested a meeting to plead for aid for the Suri, but she already knew what to expect. Resistance, indifference, maybe even outright rejection. Her heart raced as the council members appeared on the screen, their faces flickering into view, each one a different species, each with their own agenda. "Captain Rise, you have the floor," said Grand Counselor Lyra, a tall alien with shimmering blue skin. Her voice was cold, and her eyes gave nothing away. Ilara stood, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. "I've just returned from the Suri homeworld. They are on the brink of extinction. Their planet is in ruins, and their people have been abandoned by the galaxy. They need our help." A murmur of disbelief spread through the council as Ilara spoke. Some of the members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Ilara could see that they weren't interested in her words. They were already set in their ways. "Captain Reyes," said Vorn, a bulky alien with a heavy accent. "The Suri are a lost cause. They have been for years. Why should we waste resources on a race that couldn't defend itself in the first place?" Ilara clenched her fists, feeling the anger rise within her. They were betrayed. The Krill attacked them, and every other galactic faction turned its back. "We can't just let them disappear into history. Humanity can't be like that." Vorn scoffed, clearly uninterested. "Humanity has its own problems. We cannot afford to help every abandoned species in the galaxy. There are others who need our attention. The Suri's fate was sealed long ago." "But you don't understand," Ilara pressed. "The Suri are survivors. They are willing to fight for their future, but they can't do it alone. I'm asking for humanity to stand with them." Lyra's expression remained neutral, but Ilara could tell she was weighing the situation. The silence that followed was thick, and for a moment, Ilara felt the weight of her position. She had argued before, but this felt different. This wasn't just about politics. This was about making a choice. "Captain Reyes," Lyra finally spoke, her tone more measured. "We cannot afford to intervene in this matter. The Sari's problems are not our responsibility. The galaxy has moved on. The words hit Ilara like a slap. She felt the sting of rejection, but she didn't back down. You're wrong. If we don't help, who will? The council members exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. The meeting ended with little more than vague reassurances and empty promises, and Ilara was left alone in her quarters once again. The decision had been made, not by her, but by the galaxy that had long since abandoned the Sari. Frustrated, Ilara turned off the console. She knew the council wasn't going to act. If she wanted to help the Sari, she would have to do it herself. Ilara paced back and forth in her quarters, her mind racing. The council had rejected her plea, but the Sari couldn't just be left to disappear. She couldn't accept that. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. If humanity wanted to be something more than just another race focused on self-interest, they had to stand up for the Sari. They had to make a choice, and it had to be now. She activated her communication console and contacted Lieutenant Marcos. His face appeared on the screen, concern written all over it. Captain, I wasn't expecting to hear from you again so soon. What's the next move? Ilara's jaw tightened as she looked at him. The council refuses to help. They've abandoned the Sari, and they won't change their minds. But I'm not giving up on them. Marcos raised an eyebrow. So, what are you suggesting? We're still waiting for orders from the council. Without their support, this could be considered a rogue mission. I'm not asking for their approval anymore. Ilara replied, her voice firm. Humanity can make a choice to help the Sari. We don't need the council to tell us what's right. I'm going to lead a mission to defend them, to help them survive. I need you and the crew to be ready. Marcos stared at her for a long moment. He knew this mission would be dangerous, with no support from higher authorities. But he also knew Ilara, and he trusted her. You're asking us to risk everything, Captain. Are you sure about this? I'm sure, Ilara said, her voice resolute. The Sari are being hunted by the Krill. Their planet is dying. And if we don't act, they'll be wiped out. This is bigger than us. It's bigger than the Council. Humanity can choose to make a difference. Marcos nodded slowly. All right, Captain. You have my support. Let's get the crew ready. Ilara gave a small, relieved smile. Thank you, Marcos. I knew I could count on you. As Ilara ended the call, she turned to look at the crew members who had gathered outside her quarters. They stood in silence, waiting for her to speak. I know what you're all thinking, she said, her voice strong but tinged with the weight of their situation. This mission is dangerous, and we may not have the resources we need. The Council won't help us, and we'll be going against orders. But we're humans, and that means something. We don't turn our backs on those in need. The crew exchanged looks. There was a long pause, but then one by one, they nodded in agreement. Ilara's words had struck a chord with them. They had all been trained to fight for humanity, but now they were choosing to fight for something bigger than themselves. Ilara felt a surge of pride as she looked at her team. Together, they were going to make a stand for the Sari. We'll head to the Sari homeworld and do everything we can to help them survive. We're not just doing this for them. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. Humanity had chosen to defend the forgotten, and Ilara was ready to lead them into battle. The Stellar Guardian cruised through the dark void of space, heading back toward the Sari homeworld. Ilara stood on the bridge, her eyes focused on the holographic display. The crew had prepared for everything: repairs, weapons, and supplies. But there was still one crucial thing they needed: trust. The Sari had been alone for so long, they had forgotten how to work with others, especially with humans. Now, Ilara needed to build that trust. I'll get started on the training, Marcos said, entering the bridge. He handed her a datapad filled with details on the Sari's combat techniques. I've reviewed their technology, and they're not completely without resources. We can teach them to defend themselves, but it's going to take time. Ilara nodded. We don't have a lot of time. The krill are still out there, and they'll come for the Suri as soon as they can. We need to move fast. Marcos hesitated. But they don't trust us, Captain. After all that's happened, they're not just going to accept our help. I know, Ilara replied quietly. But we have to try. I'll be working with their leaders, convincing them that we're here for the right reasons. We'll show them what we can do. Over the next few days, Ilara and her crew began their mission. They met with the Suri, focusing on training the warriors and leaders. The Suri were strong, but their skills were outdated, and they were lacking in modern tactics. Ilara and Marcos led the training, teaching them how to handle advanced human weapons and how to use their environment to their advantage. At first, the Suri were hesitant. Some were suspicious of the humans' intentions, and many were too proud to accept that they needed help. Felos, their leader, watched the training with a mix of hope and fear. He wanted to believe in humanity, but after years of isolation and betrayal, trust didn't come easily. Ilara spent most of her time with Felos, guiding him through the strategies. She could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes. The survival of his people rested on his shoulders, and it was clear he didn't want to fail them again. One afternoon, as they took a break from training, Felos pulled Ilara aside. I don't understand. Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything. The galaxy has forgotten us. Why are you risking your people's lives for ours? Ilara looked at him, her expression softening. Because humanity isn't like the rest of the galaxy. We've made mistakes, but we still believe in second chances. You and your people deserve that. We're not doing this out of pity. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. Felos seemed to consider her words for a moment. Then he nodded. Perhaps I've been wrong about you. If you truly believe that, then we will stand with you, Captain. As the days passed, the training began to pay off. The Suri warriors became more skilled, and their confidence grew. They learned to use their old weapons alongside the human-made ones, adapting new tactics that Ilara and her crew had shown them. The bond between the humans and Suri was still fragile, but it was beginning to take root. Ilara felt a sense of pride as she watched the Suri warriors prepare for what was to come. She knew they still had a long way to go, but they had taken the first steps toward survival. Humanity had chosen to defend the forgotten, and now the Suri had chosen to fight back. The Stellar Guardian had been in orbit above the Suri homeworld for days now, and the crew had been busy preparing. Ilara watched as the Suri warriors trained in the distance, their movements now more fluid and confident. Despite the progress, a feeling of unease lingered in the air. Ilara knew that the krill would come soon, and she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Then, one afternoon, they got the news. The ship's communications officer, Lieutenant Kayla, burst into Ilara's quarters, a worried look on her face. "Captain, you need to see this," she said, her voice urgent. Ilara followed Kayla to the bridge, where a large holographic display showed a fleet of krill ships emerging from a nearby sector. The ships were dark and menacing, their sleek forms cutting through space like shadows. Ilara's stomach tightened as she saw the unmistakable symbol of the krill on their hulls, an emblem of death and destruction. "They found us," Ilara muttered under her breath. "They're coming for the Suri." Kayla quickly zoomed in on the fleet's formation. It's a full-scale attack. They're going to strike the planet soon. They're not here for a peaceful negotiation. Ilara clenched her fists. The krill had been hunting the Suri for years, but this was the first time they had shown such force. The Suri were vulnerable, and now, with the human help, they had become a target. Ilara knew this wasn't just about the Suri's survival anymore. It was a fight for everything humanity stood for. "We need to warn Felos," Ilara said. "Get the crew ready for a counteroffensive. This is going to be a battle like no other." Later that day, Ilara and Felos met in a secluded area away from the rest of the Suri. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a sense of unity between the two leaders now. Felos had finally accepted humanity's help, and he trusted Ilara. "The krill won't stop until we are completely wiped out," Thalos said, his voice quiet but full of determination. "But with your help, we might stand a chance." Ilara nodded. "We've been training, and we've prepared as much as we can. We have one advantage: surprise. We don't know if the krill are aware of us working together, but if we can hit them first, we might be able to gain the upper hand." Thalos raised an eyebrow. "You think we can defeat them?" "We won't know until we try," Ilara said. "But we'll give them everything we've got." As they finished their discussion, a transmission came through the ship's comms. The krill fleet was entering orbit. It was time. Ilara looked at Thalos, determination in her eyes. "It's now or never." The Sari leader stood tall. "We will fight with you, Captain, for our people and for yours." As Ilara and Thalos watched the skies above, the tension was palpable. The krill were here, and the battle for the Sari's survival was about to begin. Ilara couldn't help but wonder if humanity was ready to face an enemy like the krill. But there was no turning back now. The galaxy might have forgotten the Sari, but humanity hadn't, and they weren't about to let the Sari fall without a fight. The Stellar Guardian shook as the first volley of energy blasts struck the atmosphere of the Sari homeworld. Ilara gripped the edge of the command console, her knuckles white. The krill fleet had arrived in full force, and the battle had begun. The sky above was filled with fire and debris as their ships descended, preparing for the invasion. "Ilara, we've got incoming," Lieutenant Kayla shouted from her station. "Krill ships are breaking through the atmosphere, and they're deploying ground forces." Ilara's mind raced. She had prepared for this moment, but no amount of planning could fully prepare them for the chaos of an all-out assault. The Sari homeworld had never seen a battle like this before. With their planet in ruins and their forces weak, the Sari were about to face their most dangerous enemy yet. "Take us down to the surface," Ilara ordered. "We need to coordinate with the Sari forces on the ground. The krill won't give us any time." As the ship descended through the atmosphere, Ilara's thoughts were on the Sari and the humans they had trained. The warriors had come a long way since the training began, but this was a different kind of fight. It wasn't just about skill, it was about survival. When the Stellar Guardian finally touched down, Ilara rushed to meet Thalos and the Sari leaders at the landing site. The Sari had prepared makeshift defenses, blasted trenches, barricades, and a few old weapons they had managed to repair. It was a far cry from the technology and strength they once had, but it was all they could manage. Thalos stood tall, his face set in a grim expression. "The krill will be here soon. We're ready, but we can't hold them off forever." "We don't need forever," Ilara replied, her voice steady. "We just need to hold them off long enough for the counterattack." As the first wave of krill soldiers landed, the ground trembled. Ilara could see their armored figures marching toward the Sari defenses, their weapons primed and ready. But the Sari weren't alone anymore. "Ilara, we've got your six," Marcos's voice crackled through her comms. "We've set up firing positions along the ridge. We'll hit them hard." Ilara's heart lifted. Humanity had joined the fight. It wasn't just the Sari anymore. They were in this together. The battle was fierce from the start. The Sari warriors fought with all the strength they could muster, using the skills they had learned from the humans. Ilara's team worked alongside them, picking off krill soldiers with precision and timing. The humans had brought advanced technology, weapons, and strategies, and it was paying off. The krill were not used to facing an enemy that fought back with such determination. But the krill were relentless. More ships arrived, and the battle seemed to intensify with every passing moment. Ilara could hear the sounds of explosions and the cries of soldiers as they fought for their lives. It was a brutal, exhausting battle, and they were all pushing their limits. At the front lines, Ilara and Thalos fought side by side. She had never seen a leader fight like him. He was fierce, focused, and never once showed fear. As a krill soldier charged at them, Thalos raised his weapon and struck with deadly accuracy. Ilara followed his lead, her weapon firing with precision. taking down enemies left and right. Hours passed, and the battle seemed endless. Ilara could feel the weight of it all, the lives of the Sari, the future of humanity, all hanging in the balance. But they couldn't give up now. They had chosen to stand together, and they would see it through, no matter the cost. The tide of the battle slowly began to turn. The Krill were losing ground, and Ilara saw the first signs of their retreat. The Sari, bolstered by the strength of their new allies, were holding their own. "We did it," Thelos said, his voice weary but filled with pride. Ilara nodded, her chest heavy with relief. "This isn't over yet, but we've taken the first step." As the sun began to set over the battlefield, the remnants of the Krill fleet withdrew, their ships disappearing into the dark sky. The Sari had survived. They had fought back, not just with their own strength, but with the help of the humans who had stood by them when no one else would. The victory was hard-earned, but it was theirs. Ilara stood beside Thelos, watching the surviving warriors gather in the distance. Humanity had kept its promise, and in doing so, had helped give the Sari a future. The battlefield was quiet, except for the occasional crackle of distant fires and the exhausted breathing of soldiers. The sun had set, casting long shadows over the Sari homeworld as the last of the Krill forces retreated into space. Ilara stood at the edge of the field, looking out at the warriors of both species, their bodies covered in dirt and blood, but their faces filled with relief. They had won, but the victory had come at a high cost. Many lives had been lost, Sari and human alike. The battlefield was littered with the fallen, but the survivors stood tall. It wasn't just the weapons that had won the battle. It was the will to fight, the shared desire to protect something worth saving. And for that, Ilara knew they had achieved something more than just survival. They had made a stand for something greater than themselves. Beside her, Thelos surveyed the scene. His face was tired, his usual strong demeanor worn thin from the battle, but there was a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I never thought we would have a chance," he said quietly. "But with your help, we did it." Ilara turned to him, her face soft with empathy. "We did it together. Humanity and the Sari. It's not just about saving your world anymore. It's about proving that the galaxy can still care, that we can still make a difference." Thelos nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight of her words. "Perhaps we've been wrong about the galaxy. Perhaps it's not as broken as we thought." The two of them stood there in silence, taking in the moment. The battle had been brutal, but they had done the impossible. Together, they had defeated the Krill, an enemy that had threatened to wipe out an entire civilization. But this victory wasn't just a military one. It was a victory of compassion, of humanity choosing to do what was right when no one else would. As Ilara turned to leave, Marcos approached, his face serious, but with a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Captain, we've got word from the Galactic Council," he said, holding up a datapad. Ilara froze, her heart skipping a beat. After everything they had been through, after the Council's earlier rejection, she hadn't expected any support from them. But Marcos continued. "They're offering assistance, resources, aid for rebuilding the Sari world. They've finally taken notice of what humanity did." Ilara stared at him, incredulous. She had expected nothing from the Council, nothing but indifference. But this was different. This was a change, a shift in how the galaxy saw humanity. She had proved that it was possible to make a stand, to defend the forgotten, and now the galaxy was beginning to see it too. Thelos, who had overheard the conversation, looked at Ilara. "You did it, Captain. You showed the galaxy what it means to stand together." Ilara smiled, though it was bittersweet. "It's not just about this victory. It's about what comes next. The Sari aren't alone anymore, and neither are we. The battle may have been won, but the real work was only just beginning. Rebuilding, healing, and ensuring that the galaxy never forgot the lessons they had learned today. Humanity had chosen to defend the forgotten, and in doing so, They had proven that compassion could still change the course of history. As the stars above shone brightly, Ilara knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where humanity and the Suri would stand together, stronger than ever before. The days following the battle were filled with both relief and hard work. The Krill had retreated, but the damage done to the Suri homeworld was extensive. Fires still burned in the distance, and much of the planet's infrastructure had been destroyed during the conflict. But there was also a sense of hope, a feeling that something had changed. The Suri were no longer alone. Humanity had stood by them, and together they had won. Ilara stood in the midst of the Suri's makeshift camp, watching as the survivors worked together to rebuild. Suri and human soldiers moved side by side, clearing debris and repairing the defenses. It was a slow process, but it was progress. There was a sense of unity now, a shared purpose that hadn't existed before. Thalos approached, his face lined with exhaustion, but also filled with a quiet pride. He had always been a leader, but now, after the battle, he was something more. He was a symbol of survival, of strength, and of the power of hope. "I never thought we'd be here," he said, his voice soft. "It's hard to believe we survived, but here we are." Ilara nodded, watching the workers in the distance. "You did it, Thalos. You and your people, but you didn't do it alone. Humanity stood with you." "I know," Thalos said, his voice growing serious. "And for that, I will be forever grateful. But this isn't the end. It's only the beginning." Ilara met his gaze, understanding exactly what he meant. The Suri had survived the Krill, but they had lost so much in the process. They were rebuilding, but there was still much to be done. The galaxy may have taken notice, but the true challenge would be in making sure the Suri had a future. "The road ahead is going to be tough," Ilara said, "but you don't have to do it alone anymore. Humanity is here, and we're not going anywhere." Thalos nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm starting to believe that." As the days passed, the alliance between humanity and the Suri grew stronger. The Galactic Council, after seeing the bravery and determination of both species, began to send aid. Supplies, medical teams, and resources began to flow in. And soon, the Suri were able to rebuild their cities, their homes, and their way of life. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in years, there was hope. Ilara walked through the rebuilt streets of the Suri city, a place that was slowly coming back to life. The once crumbling buildings were now being repaired, and there was a buzz of activity in the air. Children played in the streets, their laughter filling the air. The Suri were starting to heal, and humanity had played a big part in that. "I never thought I'd see this day," Marcos said, walking beside her. "It's incredible how far we've come. From a galaxy that forgot them, to this. It's a new beginning." Ilara smiled, looking around at the bustling city. "It is a new beginning. Not just for the Suri, but for all of us. We've proven that we can stand for what's right, even when no one else will." Marcos looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "You led us to this, Captain. You made it possible." Ilara shook her head. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us, humans and Suri, working together. That's what made the difference." As she watched the Suri rebuild their world, Ilara felt a sense of fulfillment. They had won the battle, but more importantly, they had started something that could last, a bond between two species that would never be broken. They had shown the galaxy that even in the darkest of times, humanity could choose to stand for something greater than itself. And that, Ilara knew, was only the beginning.